If you look back on humanity, how many inflection points in terms of industries emerging can you point to? And how lucky do you have to be to sort of be on the scene and have a chance to do that? If one shows up and you've got an invitation to sit at the table, it seemed to me like it would be a real miss not to try to take part in something like that.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, where we ask your favorite builders the questions you wish you could ask yourself. This is a production of neonewstoday.com, and I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode of the Smart Economy Podcast, we're joined by Nick Hansen, the team lead at the Graph Foundation, the entity responsible for stewarding the Graph, an indexing protocol for organizing blockchain data and making it easily accessible. In this conversation, Nick and I discussed how hosting a podcast led to becoming the lead at a brand name blockchain foundation, how the Graph aims to be the Google of blockchains, the benefit of decentralized solutions over their centralized counterparts, innovating blockchain projects that have the OG status, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said in this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that the host or guest might hold tokens discussed in any given episode. You can read a disclaimer at neonewstoday.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating and reviewing on your favorite podcasting platform and sharing with your friends and family. Every rating, review, like, comment, and share helps us reach more people and bring you more of your favorite guests. With all that said, I really enjoyed chatting with Nick, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Nick Hansen, the team lead at the Graph Foundation. I'm really excited about this conversation today. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dylan. Thank you so much for having me here. I've been thrilled to meet you and take part in this discussion, so thanks, man.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. You've got a really cool background. It's kind of like winding and curving like mine. But before we dig into that, I do just kind of want to get a sense of what was your introduction into blockchain and crypto? I asked this question and like 80% of the people are like, I looked at Bitcoin in 2012 and didn't come back until 2017. What's your situation? What's your experience with blockchain crypto like? And did you have your aha moment immediately or did it take a few years?
Yeah, so I actually know the moment. Like I know the moment when this happened, which is a trip, but I was working as a marketing business development guy in traditional finance. So worked for a little boutique regional broker dealer or RIA. So anybody that's sort of in the TradFi world will know what those terms are. But for those that don't, small little organization. And my brother called me one day and we were just catching up and he said, I don't understand why you TradFi guys aren't talking more about crypto. This is the next huge asset class. And at the time, and if I could have him on here, it would be very funny to hear him and I go back and forth. But I basically said to him, look, you could drive to the building right now, come up to the conference room. I'll put everyone in our organization in there and no one will know what the heck you're talking about. Like, not only is there no interest, like nobody here even knows what you're talking about. So that opened the door to a longer conversation that I think even continued on my drive home. I caught up with him again on the way home. And in essence, older brother said, look, you need to pay more attention to this. There's a lot of really interesting things going on there. This is sort of the way the future is going. So whether or not your organization or the people you work with have any interest as my brother, you need to kind of wake up and pay more attention. So I did. And I'll be honest, and I think this is sort of pretty common. It started with an interest in Bitcoin and this new economic or financial system. So yeah, I opened a Coinbase account and I thought, what's going on here? What are tokens? Can you buy these things? And how does all of that work? So that was my introduction. It came through a brother prompting me to kind of get involved. I didn't know anything at the time. I recall when I was a younger guy in a different industry besides TradFi, I recall being in the office one day and a colleague a few cubies down from me said, let's buy some Bitcoin today. And I remember mocking him for probably 30 or 40 minutes straight, just the jokes about sort of what he was thinking and what he was up to. So I had early ideas of Bitcoin. a long time ago, but I didn't do anything. It was a call from a brother that sort of turned the light bulb on and got me interested.
What year was it when you were making fun of your coworker for wanting to buy Bitcoin? And then what year was it when your brother kind of like sparked the drive for you?
Yep. So I'm going to get the year wrong with my colleague, but it was definitely
Early.
really early. It's like maybe early 2010s.
Okay.
So
Wow.
somewhere in there. I mean, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um, and this guy was very forward thinking. He was a little bit of a technologist. We were working in real estate at the time. So, we weren't talking about Bitcoin every day. We were talking about leases and land development deals. And so he was just always a little spunky and had crazy ideas. But yeah, we were joking and we gave him a lot of crap for that day. And then my brother was 2021, I think, around that time period, late in the year. And yeah, that conversation, I'll never forget it. I remember looking out my office window, just being like, man, I love this guy. He is calling me in the middle of my day, pitching me crypto. What is he talking about?
Awesome. So I alluded to this in kind of like the intro, but you and I have both had winding paths that ended us into the blockchain space. Mine is a little bit more straightforward. I worked as an urban planner before I got bit by the crypto bug in 2017. And then less than 7 months after buying my first Bitcoin, my first portion of a Bitcoin. I was working full time in the blockchain space. Prior to you joining the Graph ecosystem, you mentioned earlier that you had your hand in a lot of different interesting pots: real estate, sales. You did a radio talk show stint. You were in marketing departments for TradFi. You also taught a little bit. So maybe we can just kind of do the ontology of your career. Like, where did you start out, and then like how did your path lead you to the Graph?
Yeah, well, it is a winding road, and I think that's pretty common for Web3. I don't remember who it was. I was talking to somebody one day, and it said, you almost need somebody that is open to the windiness of career flexibility to even enter into the space, at least as it presently sits. Yeah, my background, I've always cared a lot about career. I've always cared a lot about profession, probably too much, but early on in my life, I got involved in real estate. So I was an asset manager, worked on some big projects where basically I would manage, office buildings, medical buildings, retail sites. And I did that for quite a while. And I didn't really enjoy it. Around that time, I was trying to figure out an off ramp of, how do I get out of real estate if this isn't my thing? And so I went and got a graduate degree in business. And I was just sort of hoping that would be a launch pad for me to try something different. And it worked. I sort of leveraged out of real estate into a short stint in sales. But it was around that time that an old high school friend reached out to me and said, hey, we're thinking about doing a radio show, and you've always been, kind of an interesting guy, probably could do the host thing. And would you be willing to kind of meet me and my partner on Saturdays? We'll go down to the radio station and we'll record a radio show. So I did. So it was basically like a side hustle a little bit. I don't even know if they offered to pay me, but I was excited at the opportunity. The radio station itself here where I live was fairly well known. So I thought, well, people are going to hear this. This isn't some weird little radio station that no one will ever hear. So yeah, I went and did it, and it was a thrill. We did live shows. So live radio is amazing, right? We had a couple times where there was like some sort of external event that we had to warn people about traffic or some health concerns. So that was always fun to get the notes and kind of have to do that live and coming in and out of breaks. And so I did that for a while. I still had my sales gig. And then those guys at the financial firm that we were working on the radio show said, hey, why don't you come do full-time marketing for us? So leveraged out of that to go with them. And then that's where I sat down for a while and worked with them. And I loved it. We grew that firm. I was part of sort of a really amazing growth trajectory and had a lot of fun working with that team. And while I was working in that financial organization, the college where I went and got my graduate degree reached out to me and said, hey, we have a business class. We think you're best suited for it. Would you ever be willing to come back and teach here? I was in the middle of a transition, so I said no, but it was really hard for me because my dream, I think if I could like start my life over, I was probably born to be an academic. I really love academia. I love teaching. So I was like, oh man, I have to say no. I'm just changing jobs. It doesn't work. And maybe 2 or 3 months go by, and then the dean of the business school reached out and said, hey, this is my baby. This is my class. I taught it to you. I really need to hand it off to like the next generation. Will you please come teach it? And so, yeah, I now I have another side hustle. So I stayed at the financial firm, continued working on that. And then nights and weekends, I would go teach. And I think I taught for, I'm forgetting 7 years. Maybe you'll know better because you looked recently, but around 7 years. And I loved it. I would work all day, grab a quick sandwich and coffee, and head straight into class and teach that night, and would teach graduate students, undergraduate students, and I loved it. And I did that for a very long time until I got a call from my brother one day and said, "You need to start paying attention to crypto."
Awesome. It all comes full circle. And I want to delve into the interesting way in which you broke into the crypto space as well. But I guess as a content creator, both of us are content creators, and have been over the past handful of years. What was it about like radio that made you think this is something I want to do? And I asked that question. It sounds really simple at face value, but we're in the era of streaming services. We're in the era of Netflix. We're in the era of podcasts, and have been for the past decade or so. So, and I don't mean to sound like radio's dying, but like, what made you say like, hell yeah, I'm going to give up a part of my Saturdays to go into this thing that may or may not have a dwindling audience because perhaps there's a certain demographic that only listens to radio? And then also, what was it like actually like having a studio, going into it? What were the topics you guys covered? I'm just super interested in that. That part of your background is just like really cool to me.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it was an amazing ride. And I think some people are like, oh man, that sounds pretty boring. And other people will be like, that's super intimidating. But for me, it was just the challenge of it, right? I mean, going and doing starting from zero and doing a live radio show with two like financial experts and asking them questions, taking callers, working with a producer who's behind the glass, playing the music in and out on a pretty well-known station. Like, yeah, I just thought, well, this is an incredible challenge, and it sounded like a fun thing. So that was really my interest. And we would talk about, we'd give people financial advice. It was a little bit modeled on, for, listeners of this podcast who are in the US. There's a guy in the US called Dave Ramsey. He's a pretty famous, thought leader on personal finance. So we modeled a lot of the show on that approach of taking callers and trying to give personal financial advice. So there was part of it that's like, this is information I'd like to learn. Sure. The experience of getting to work and reconnecting with an old high school friend was interesting to me. But yeah, going live on the air and knowing that your margin for error was really tight was amazing, because you'd have someone behind the glass being like, 10 seconds, and you'd have to get this question wound down and then get the promo out the door. And so it was a lot of fun, kept me on my toes, and I loved it.
Cool. The kind of like seed that got me interested into blockchain and crypto was learning about index funds, 401ks, IRAs, the very basics. And then throughout my studies in 2015, 16, 17, really getting to understand the traditional financial world and how to plan for retirement and all these things, you kept coming across all these people calling Bitcoin a scam. And of course, after a while, you learn what a 401k is, you learn what an index fund is, you kind of hit the level that you need to. And then for me, it was like, all right, well, let's go research Bitcoin. And then, of course, I bought some, and that was it for me. So for you, when you're after that conversation with your brother, you probably acquire some digital assets. What happens then? Because if it's similar to me, it became a thing that was all consuming. It was all you could think about. It's creeping into your mind during your day at your day job. What was it like for you? And how did you start exploring the various different blockchain ecosystems after you bought probably your first few blue chips, Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a little bit nuanced, and so forgive me if I take you through it. But yes, he introduced me, got me thinking about it, opened an account on Coinbase, tried to figure out what this whole thing was. And at the time, he was really enthusiastic about a particular protocol. I won't say what it was, but, he was very excited about it. So he was...
Is it still around?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's very well known, but I just don't want to do that to him or, that community. So
yeah.
Basically, though, he was educating me and being a great mentor but he was also doing it through the lens of like a project he was super interested in. So I used that as my research vector, his enthusiasm and what I was seeing in there. And so that's sort of how I learned it. I was looking at Coinbase and then I was getting information from my brother about this particular project. And so what I learned early on is that, wow, in Web3, in this crypto thing, you can actually start a brand and become a thought leader. Because as I watched his project and I listened to the types of people that he was interested in or he was connecting with, these were just, content creators, people that were enthusiastic about the project and doing like you, just putting in time and sacrificing and getting to know what was going on in this space. So I immediately launched an online brand. So I was teaching, I was on the financial thing, and I'm like, okay, I probably got a little more space to do one more side hustle, which is let's just play this out. Like if you can really show up, create an online brand and get involved in this, then let's see how that goes. So I was contemplating, how would I do that? What would that look like? And it was around that time that I became aware of the graph. And the way I found the graph was just serendipity. I was looking at my Coinbase account one night and I saw a new token launch and it was called the graph. And I'm like, what is this thing? So I started what I hope most people would do is I started Googling the founders. I did as much research as I could. So, not just like buy and hold or buy and flip type of mentality. It was like, who are these people? What are they up to? What's this technology? So I spent the evening Googling the three founders. I spent the evening Googling what is the graph, what is indexing blockchain data. And I kind of built some personal conviction that this is a new token. So it's a fresh snow for a guy like me who wants to be a content creator. I thought what I'll do is I'll use my marketing, some of my TradFi analytics, a little bit of a scratch graph designer. I'm probably not very good at all, but at the time I thought I could pull this off. So I would do analytics, infographics. I would interview people. So I started sending out, written interviews to people. I'd find them on Discord or wherever and say, hey, I 10 questions, and I would publish it. So that's what I did. I became what I hope to be, this online persona that could get some traction in the graph space, all without knowing how this works. Would I make money? Was it worth it or not? But I had conviction for the graph. These founders were real. They'd been working on the problem for a long time. It was new, so I wasn't showing up to a crowded space. So yeah, I rolled the dice on that. And it started with just online graphics, online marketing, and some written interviews, and eventually became a podcast and a little bit of a voice within the graph community.
Yeah, so you have this kind of background in finances, and this is something that I've constantly been grappling with since I've been working in the space since 2018. And you see a lot of anons on crypto Twitter who may or may not get mad about the price of a token. Usually they're mad when it's going down, and they say, we're investors in a project. And I've always been very careful with my words ever since I bought my first crypto in 2017 to mention that we're speculating. We're speculating on an asset. And maybe now, finally, in 2025, maybe 2024, we could start saying that like one or two blue chips could be an investment because of the way that Wall Street is looking at ETFs, the underlying assets, what have you. How do you kind of balance this track record, this career in traditional financial instruments, and also this kind of like Wild West, cutting edge, digital asset, crypto space? How do you kind of like balance trying to create a PE ratio or something similar that's realistic and grounded for how your friends who are outside of crypto might be able to look at various different digital assets?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, this is not a graph-centric question. This is an industry question, and any participant in this industry has to answer these types of questions. For me, I've never advised anybody to buy anything, and I don't provide financial advice. No one should take financial advice from me. And I think the regulatory environment, although shifting favorable to all the incredible things that have been done within sort of this blockchain, crypto, Web3 industry, it's exciting to see. It's still, being shaped, and I think people need to be super cautious. So when I talk about it generally, I say, first of all, as you said, these are high risk things, and you don't always know who's on the other side of the table. You don't always understand their intentions. And so the way to kind of get involved in this thing is to do what I did, and presumably what you and a lot of listeners did, which is get to know people, show up in Discord, get involved in Telegram, and see if you can develop some conviction for the actual tech and the mission or mandate of what this project aims to do. If you can get your mind around that, and you can shake it, a couple of hands digitally or in person, then you're probably in a position to kind of make some decisions about, do I want to own that token? Do I want to participate in that network in some other financial way? And of course, Web3 offers a variety of ways to participate in this way. But as a general rule, you absolutely have to do your own research. And it's silly, right? Because Web3 sort of like bastardized that term, but it's just good old-fashioned logic, right? This is true when you're buying a home, when you're buying a car, when you're choosing a partner, when you're deciding if you want to get a dog. Like, do your own research, figure it out. And the thing about traditional finance that is super apropos for the types of things that we're talking about today is traditional finance recognizes that the personal needs and the risk tolerance and all of those types of things related to your own research and the decisions you make evolve over time. As you get older, you're probably more risk adverse than you are as a young person. So what does that mean? That just means that there are a lot of rules already in place, set in place through traditional finance that you can leverage to make decisions about, what you do with how you invest and in the types of projects you get interested in. It's really important to kind of leverage that framework because it's already fully developed. I mean, Wall Street had a jump on the way to think about research and doing your own research for a very long time. The question, though, the other part of your question is like, what analytics do you point to, right? Like, is there a PE ratio and stuff? And yeah, that gets super complicated. Like I said, I don't provide financial advice. And even in my role in traditional finance, I wasn't even doing that type of work. So even to kind of say something about that would be tricky, but it is an industry problem. I think all projects need to get better at communicating the fundamentals and demonstrating sort of value creation and value capture. It's not anything specific to any projects I'm interested in. It's an industry thing. And I'm super excited that, the industry starts to do better at that. And I think regulatory support and regulatory framework brings that opportunity more to life. So yeah, I think we'll see a lot of amazing things sort of in the next few years about that.
Yeah, I only ask because it's just so hard to quantify and use objective, deliverable metrics still to this day for a lot of different blockchain projects. So it just feels like we're just now turning the corner where maybe, just maybe, we can start coming up with some quantifiable measurements that anybody who's interested in exploring the space can use when they're performing their own research. But the last question I want to ask before we kind of like massage into the graph and the graph ecosystem, and I'm super glad you doubled down on talking about the radio show experience you had, because I also think that like the job you got out of your radio show, you also leveraged your podcast into helping you get a step up into creating a role within the graph ecosystem. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the podcast. You had more than 200 interviews, which is phenomenal. You're actually our 100th interview for the Smart Economy.
Are you kidding?
Podcast. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Well, I'm honored by that, by the way. That was a huge deal for me. So, I guess the fates lined it up this way, but congratulations. That's a huge milestone. And yeah, I'm honored to be here. I didn't know that, but congrats. That's a big deal.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I think that, and I'll take another little winding detour. A couple years ago, I went on a college campus university tour to go talk to blockchain clubs about how to build careers in Web3. And a lot of students wanted to be in the Web3 space, but they were still grappling this concept of, do I build a project now? Do I get my degree? I don't know how to get into the space. It's still also very nascent. So there's no kind of like trajectory to get in. You kind of have to figure out a way to open the door for yourself. And so you did this with the QRTIQ podcast. So how did you launch it? How did you come across your guests? And then maybe we can also use that experience that you had and talk about how you parlayed that into building a role within the Graph Foundation and the Graph ecosystem.
Okay, so the GRTIQ brand is the brand I launched when I started experimenting with, okay, maybe I'll enter into the space. And it was after just a few months. I mean, I think I launched GRTIQ formally on a December into January, and it was in March where the podcast went live. And so episode one launched. I never missed a Friday until my role changed at the Graph Foundation. So that was always sort of a big deal to me that ever since I launched, I hit every Friday. And as you said, over 200 episodes, interviewed a lot of people similar to you, inside, outside the ecosystem, just want to get to know people and hear stories. Very much sort of a story-oriented interview type of style. Like I'm non-technical, so I didn't want to get people on and debate different things. I just wanted to hear, like you're doing today, how people got to where they were and sort of what their motivations were. I did that for 8 months, just as a side hustle. So I got to know a lot of people. I actually had the opportunity to interview people at the Graph Foundation that I would eventually go to work with, but I was meeting a lot of other thought leaders in the Graph ecosystem. And as I got my traction and as I built up some credibility, those folks started introducing me to other folks. And yeah, I mean, for anyone interested, you could go to my podcast and kind of see that, yeah, I had some really great guests on, notable guests that I was really lucky to network into. And I did that for 8 months. So I was teaching, I was doing the financial thing, and I was doing this podcast. And as you well know, podcasts are a ton of work. And no one really appreciates how much research and all the production and everything that goes into this. So shout out to you on your 100th. And I know that pain, but I loved it. And so this podcast experience for me was sort of the transition away from that Coinbase brother introduction of kind of like, what's going on in this space to real deep conviction for the people in the space. So I started interviewing founders, builders, and like I said, a lot of people within the Graph ecosystem. And I fell in love with the people and the passion for why they were here. And so it started to sort of mold how I viewed this industry, and it became an education. I mean, you can't have, an hour-long conversation every week and then edit it, because I was editing it myself and producing it myself. So I was like revisiting every interview multiple times. So yeah, you hear this stuff, you get a real education just from exposure. Yeah, and I started getting conviction. Okay, well, I talked to Dylan. Dylan's a brilliant guy, gave up a lot, has a great education, very honest, very ethical, and he's all in on this thing, and he's building this thing that does, X, Y, or Z. Wow, this thing is amazing. So yeah, initial spark of what is this became, these people are amazing. There's something real here. And I was very lucky, sort of 8 months in, the Graph Foundation came to me and said, we're looking for a role. It just so happened at the traditional finance organization I was working at, there was some change happening there. So it was a vector at which I had to make some life decisions in career. And it was funny. You may appreciate this. Some of your listeners might, but I came home on the day I sort of needed to make that decision. And I have a wife and 2 children, and I involved them in my professional decisions. So we kind of laid out the benefits of staying, the benefits of making the move, and the impact it would have. And yeah, I just remember everyone at the table was like, yeah, you got to do this crypto thing. Like, this sounds like
Awesome.
the future. This is incredible tech. So made the move full time to the foundation, and yeah, I haven't looked back.
Cool. Also, apologies. GRTIQ.
Yeah, no stress.
Okay.
No stress.
That's amazing and that you kind of half answered the other question I wanted to ask. When I made my leap full time into crypto, I was single. I was about to move between states. I didn't have a lot of ties or responsibilities to me. So this was also 3 years sooner than you jumped into the space full time. What were the opportunities that you were super excited about jumping full time into the Graph ecosystem? And if you can recall, what were some of the concerns about going into this nascent industry in general full time?
Yeah, so I'll go in reverse order. Like the number one concern was, what if this thing sort of doesn't work out? Like, what
Right.
if the Graph as a project or this industry as a whole gets regulated out of existence, or there's just nothing there? But yeah, 8 months in, lots of interviews, lots of talking to people, it seemed like a relatively minor risk. In addition to that, I was a little burned out on TradFi. I'd seen enough of that industry. So even though I loved the team and I had a really great experience sort of taking part in building what that eventually became, that industry itself wasn't that sexy to me anymore. So tech seemed interesting. And how do you work with people that are based in Silicon Valley and sort of run in those circles? From where I lived, I wasn't going to relocate my family. Well, you go online and you meet them and you join the community. So it seemed like an opportunity to connect into something super interesting. So the risks at that time, to me, I felt like I had kind of gone through them all. I guess the other risk was just the opportunity cost. When I left TradFi in that role there, I was giving up somewhat of a legacy and something I had worked really hard to build. But for all the factors I just said, it seemed like worth taking it. And I forget the first part of your question, but I'm happy to sort of answer that. So forgive me. But
No,
what was the first part?
Yeah, what were the pros? Like, what
Oh,
was like, this is it?
I think it came down to one thing. I'm so glad you reminded me. It was, if you look back on humanity, right? Like go way back, go back to the pyramids and further back if you can, right? How many inflection points in terms of industries emerging can you point to? And how lucky do you have to be to sort of be on the scene and have a chance to do that? So I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. I mean, work. We all work. If you work in Web3, you work all the time, and people that aren't in the space yet, probably do the 8 to 5 thing and probably even some overtime. But if you're going to spend that time on something, it should be meaningful to you. It's one thing to feed yourself and your family. It's another thing to just kind of burn 8 hours or more of your day for something you don't care about. So I was really interested in taking part in something that seemed meaningful, and the idea that it was an emergent industry, and those don't come around. There's not going to be a new industry next year or the year after that. We don't know when these things are going to happen. But if one shows up and you've got an invitation to sit at the table, it seemed to me like, in terms of just being a human, having a human experience and looking at the way these things go, it would be a real miss not to try to take part in something like that. So that was the ultimate motivation of like, yeah, this is in the broader scheme of things, something I should try.
Yeah. So when people like first discover Bitcoin, the sexy idea is like, this is a new money that's hard and it doesn't have a government. When people first stumble on a government backing it, when people first stumble on Ethereum, this is the world's supercomputer where real world assets can live on it forever. It's digital oil. When people stumble on the graph, they're like decentralized indexing and querying protocols. I don't see how like somebody can get like super bought in to this kind of like integral part of Web3 infrastructure, but like you kind of need to be in the weeds a little bit to understand the importance of what the graph protocol offers. So maybe now we can use this as an opportunity to just like Eli 5 elevator pitch what the graph protocol is, and like why did it click for you as somebody who was like ready to leave TradFi? Why did you go into this super niche architecture and infrastructure as like, this is my all-in at space?
Yeah, well, so the graph made it super easy for me. Now these folks over time became my colleagues, right? But at the time, I didn't know who anybody was other than the research I'd done. But, they branded the graph the Google of Web3. So, I understood it immediately. And yes, I had to click into what is indexing and how does that sort of work. And again, I had the benefit of all these interviews. The first interview I ever did, episode number 1, was, by the way, somebody I stay in touch with all the time. Like we became friends. He lives on a different side of the planet, and we talk and stay in touch. And we've been through a lot of life events together. So it's really amazing that I just reached out blindly to this person. He's like, yeah, I'll do an interview. And it was an indexer. So a longtime contributor indexer at the graph. And so through that interview, I got a front row seat to understanding what indexing was. And I ended up interviewing a lot of different indexers on the graph who, for the audience, those are node operators. They are the ones that supply the queries and the data to users who use the graph. So they're the infrastructure partners. And so Google of blockchains, super easy to understand. I was already on third base, so to speak. The other thing was, there's some great articles out there. I know Multicoin wrote about this on their blog, but this thing called, the read-write problem. So it seemed fairly intuitive to me at the time, and probably for you and your audience, you were probably way ahead of this. But, blockchains are fundamentally intended to be written to. That's sort of what the technology does, and we all love it. And we want to participate in this industry by virtue of that quality. But reading blockchain isn't as easy, and it wasn't necessarily designed to be read from. And so I'm sort of using my business or strategy lens, identified that this was a legitimate problem. Like it's clear that if blockchain tech continues to grow in adoption and it solves inherently the right problem, somebody's got to figure out the read component. And so over time, I came to appreciate the graph's role in that. And, the graph as an industry participant has evolved over time, but I don't think it gets enough credit. And by the way, this has nothing to do with me. I wasn't on the bus at this point, but what the graph did for the industry as a whole, as a pioneer, introducing subgraphs, launching graph node, setting the standards, and sort of really providing a backbone for DeFi summer and sort of everything that came out of that. The graph doesn't get enough credit for being an OG and sort of standing up the industry in that way. And as I said, I had nothing to do with it at the time. I doubt I even talked to my brother at the point that sort of the graph was getting their hands really dirty on that stuff. So shout out to that first generation. But yeah, anybody who studies the nature of the problem, reading blockchain data, and will understand sort of the value of what the graph does, and even if you don't understand the tech, why it's necessary.
Maybe you can help paint a picture then, because even the most technical people don't understand the role of querying and things of this nature. So maybe just like give a few examples of how apps or dApps in general, in the general blockchain ecosystem, are improved or empowered by the graph.
Yeah. So I'll do my best. And what I want to say is, like, every dApp that you see in the Web3 space is taking data off the blockchain and conveying information to users, right? So without a dApp kind of doing that for us, a dashboard or a report or some data, maybe it's an infographic, whatever it is, they have found that data on the blockchain. They've taken some effort and some time to convey that information to you. They have to make a decision. They have to make a decision of, like, okay, as Nick said a moment ago, blockchains are easy to write to, but they're hard to read. So do we want to build an internal reading mechanism that we'll run ourselves? We'll invest in it. We'll get a team. We'll get the technology, whatever we need to do to read the blockchain data such that we're always displaying up-to-date, accurate information to our users who come to us for information about what's going on the blockchain. Well, as it turns out, that's a complicated problem, right? How so? Well, there's a lot of blockchains, right? So now you've got this team and you're like, go figure out how to index, that is, retrieve data from the blockchain and display it to our users. And it's like, well, what about this new blockchain? What about 3,000 over there? All these different blockchains every week. So they have to make some trade-offs, and it gets expensive and super cumbersome. So number one, they don't want to expand the team. It was just created to provide a solution or a service to their users, but it's a heavy operational investment. So those types of teams eventually, either because they scale to the point where they don't want to pay for that infrastructure anymore, or any other variety of reasons. Maybe their team isn't fast enough, or maybe they just can't get enough of the different blockchains. So they have to make a decision about a partnership. Like, who are we going to use then to read blockchain data so that we can do our magic and display it to our users? And this is really where the graph sort of historically has entered the conversation. And you have options at this point. It's a fork in the road moment, right? As a dApp, we're taking that as our perspective here. You can choose a centralized solution, and there are centralized competitors to the graph who will have you sign, a terms of and conditions agreement. They have all their sort of SaaS-like operational characteristics and attributes. You can choose one of them, or you could say, no, we kind of want to stick with that Web3 ethos, and we want to go with something that's decentralized. And there's a lot of reasons why you might do that. So, for example, if you go with a SaaS partner and their servers go down, you go down. If you go with a SaaS partner and they change their terms of conditions, they're like, hey, we're going to increase prices, or hey, we don't like the fact that your dApp is displaying this type of data, or whatever it might be. They can sort of turn off and turn on services. And anybody who's been around long enough knows that there's a lot of Web 2 type of entities that have done this to users, right? They kind of rug you because they change the way they do things. The benefit of going with the decentralized provider like the graph is you don't have to deal with some of that stuff, right? So any user of the graph doesn't have to sign a contract or terms and conditions type of thing. There is tons of redundancy because, as I mentioned a moment ago, there are indexers or node operators at the graph. There's a bunch of them, and they're worldwide. So there's a tremendous amount of redundancy. And we don't, the graph, and nobody at the graph sort of owns that data, right? So if you work with a centralized solution and you get sideways with them, you probably have to have a debate about, well, is that my data or your data? This sucks. I have a dApp. I'm displaying information, but like, I need to take that with me, right? If you're not going to be a great partner, I'm at the graph, like it's your data. There's no, ownership. So the way I've sort of taught it to people who want to think about it is, when you use Google, you can search it for free. And it's kind of like, well, what's their business model then? If I can go to google.com and just like search the internet web 2 for free, how are they monetizing this? And we've learned over time, sadly, that we're the product, right? They're monetizing our data. At the graph, that doesn't happen. You actually pay for the queries, and they're incredibly, cost effective for an organization who wants to scale and have a strong infra partner. And so instead of, I guess, turning the user into the product and the data into the product, it kind of returns to the original thesis that really you can just kind of make the query the product, and it safeguards sort of all the participants. And so that's how I'd answer that question, is sort of an overview of why someone would select a graph. Of course, you can go on the website, you can look at some of the benchmarking studies, but there's all these things related to uptime and redundancy and things like that that are super important to these dev teams. So it's not just like that decentralization/centralization trade-off. It's also about the performance of the tech. And you can kind of read through all that, but the graph does a great job there as well. So it's really important that if you're going to launch a decentralized project and go head to head with centralized competitors, the performance is up to snuff, and that's not a trade-off that you ask the users to make.
I'm not sure if there's been kind of like this shining moment yet, but like with Bitcoin, we had a moment for like why Bitcoin, without getting into the politics. There was the time when the truckers in Canada had their bank accounts frozen and you use Bitcoin to pay for things. There was a moment when AWS regions went down and images couldn't be seen inside of like websites because the centralized storage solution wasn't up. And so that was another reason why a decentralized service was better than its centralized entity. Have we had, in your tenure at the graph, have we had one of these moments where the graph provided something that its centralized competitor couldn't yet? Or have we just not had that kind of like implosive moment from our centralized competitors?
It's a great question. And I wish I had some of my colleagues that have been around maybe a little longer than I have. So I'm not going to provide like that amazing answer, but it's the right question. And the way I sort of think about this without knowing if there was that moment or not, decentralization is tricky because there's a lot of people who say, philosophically, the market doesn't care. Devs don't care. They just want the cheapest, fastest product. So, you got to check those boxes. But decentralization does matter. And the bet that the graph ecosystem is making is that it may not matter to you now, but we assure you over time, it's going to matter a lot. And the question is, when do you want to come to that realization? After you've come under contract and built this infrastructure with a centralized partner who you fall or out of alignment with, or who goes sideways, or there's some worldwide event that causes sort of catastrophic technological impact that your project, your people, your users are impacted by? Or do you just sort of want to understand at present now that even though the market might be slow to appreciate the benefits of decentralization, that you want to be ahead of that curve and sort of protect yourself? And so, again, I don't think this is primarily a graph thing. I mean, in the context of getting blockchain data access, we're in that sector of the industry, but a lot of organizations in and around Web3 are trying to make it more clear to the broader community about how important decentralization is. And my suspicion, I don't know, but my suspicion is that as the regulatory environment evolves and we get more clarity on what governments sort of think about decentralization and how they start classifying these types of things within this industry, a lot of people are going to care a lot more, right? So if the US government says something declarative about Bitcoin or Ethereum, on the premise because it's decentralized, I think a lot of people wake up and be like, oh, there's even sort of government clarity and some sort of importance leverage to projects that are actually decentralized. And so, yeah, the graph is holding tight to that ethos, and we're not going to let go of that.
I love it. Decentralization is a lot like the police. You don't care about it till you need
100%.
it.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Cool. So what's kind of like various different ecosystems have various different roles and needs of their foundations. So what's kind of like the Graph Foundation's role, and what is the need that it fulfills for the ecosystem?
Yeah, so the foundation has a very clear mandate, and we are very mission driven. So everyone on the foundation team really adheres to our mandate, and we make decisions every day predicated on that mandate and bring it to life. And so we understand that our responsibility, our mission is to steward the health and growth of the Graph network and the ecosystem. And we do that through, several levers. So the foundation obviously manages a treasury. So there's a funding mechanism to the things we do. We want to support and grow and lift up projects within the ecosystem. We want to also offer certain types of legal or governance type support. So, for example, there are a lot of questions related to the logo and the website and the domain and these different types of things, even sort of down to the technology of the licensing and the IP. And so a foundation, and it's particularly the Graph Foundation, plays a very, very important role in providing clarity around those types of questions. And then there's like this operational bucket, and it's really hard to describe. I'll do my best. But, basically a foundation has to take stock of the ecosystem as a whole and the partners that are contributing in there. And it has to identify specific operational tasks or activities that it needs to backfill, either until the ecosystem matures such that somebody else steps in there, or maybe you hang on to that for a long time because you need to provide some stewardship or mentorship or some like consulting like engagement there. So there are different, I would call like business functions that the foundation itself performs or backfills. And that changes over time, right? There was a period of time where we provided certain types of services, and then we don't provide those anymore, and maybe we provide other ones. And every foundation approaches this a little bit differently. Even the Graph sort of originally had a specific thesis on that. So our goal is to like deliver that mandate through clarity on sort of our funding responsibilities, that legal governance type of oversight and stewarding, and then those operational functions that we want to backfill, support, or provide leadership on. And we do all of that with sort of this wrapper of work streams that drive community engagement, drive community ownership. And so we don't work in isolation. We're constantly doing all of these things to support and unleash the broader ecosystem. I think ultimately every foundation wants to kind of be quiet and not noticed as much. And you want all the builders up in front on the front row getting all the attention. And we work really hard at the foundation to make that happen.
Yeah, the ecosystem I cut my teeth in is the Neo ecosystem. And years ago, we did an interview with someone working in the business development branch of the foundation. And we asked him, where do you see Neo, the BD branch, in 10 years? And he said, hopefully not here, because the ecosystem has like grown to be able to provide these resources to itself on its own. So I've always found that to be kind of like an interesting thing in blockchain ecosystems, is that foundations are inherently designed to hopefully work themselves out of a job.
Yeah.
And so like, congratulations, you've won, you're out of a job. But
Right.
in the meantime, you have to get there. So what does being a team lead for the Graph Foundation mean? What are you tasking yourself with? What are your priorities? What are your day-to-day? How do you kind of like structure the things that you think are important for the foundation on behalf of the ecosystem?
Yeah. So I took the role in January of 2025, and it was a big jump for me. And I met with the two prior leads. So we had leadership at the foundation that were the OG leaders, Gen 1. They were there at the start, and they became really great mentors and advisors as I studied out, am I the right person for the task? And, what is it that the team needs? And so they've made themselves available ongoing. They're very well known, Eva Baylin and a gentleman by the name of Martin. He likes security, so I'll just say Martin. Everybody from the graph will know who I'm talking about. But yeah, very well known in the broader Web3 space and have been incredibly instrumental in supporting me in my role. I would say, they gave me some latitude to redefine that role a little bit and how I wanted to go about it. I think they had one approach, and it was that going from 0 to 1 type of approach. And I think they had the right skills for that. And they definitely, burned the candle at both ends to get us from 0 to 1. I think they look to me, my background and sort of what I might be good at as maybe that leader that needs to come in and apply some more traditional management, a little bit more structured. I've heard a couple people snicker that I'm a little bit corporate-y, which I don't like, by the way, but that is what it is. But I think the point I'm making is that maybe just evolve a little bit the foundation and that leadership role. So I really see my role as team lead, number one, is making sure that from a mandate perspective, the foundation team is fully aligned. We understand our mandate. We understand how, if we're to steward the health and growth of the network and the ecosystem, how we do that via funding, legal governance, and our operational, as you mentioned, BD, whatever it is, our operational functions that we have in-house. And then I think, setting strategy and driving alignment among the team, but also all the contributors within the ecosystem is really important. So I think based on what I can tell sort of throughout the industry, foundations have varying appetites for offering leadership, offering a strong strategic voice, or trying to orient different teams towards a specific goal. I would argue, but there's a lot smarter people out there than me, that we've sort of learned over the last, call it, year or two, that foundations really need to do that more proactively. It's not a centralization risk. It's just like foundations should do that. And so I've leaned into that. So if I were around the dinner table with my family reporting on my new gig and sort of what I was working on, I would say I'm taking the team that exists, a lot of whom are OGs. We're going to professionalize a little bit the way we work together, and we work with people within the ecosystem. And I'm just going to apply some of my experiences to take it to the next level as best as I can.
What do ecosystem growth initiatives look like? Are you finding that a lot of projects just need an indexer and they're coming to you naturally? So maybe BD isn't, I don't want to say a strong focus, but maybe like BD doesn't have as much of an emphasis as it might in other ecosystems. Or are you finding that you need to incubate projects, experience, psych, by bringing in grassroots devs or grassroots small scale projects? How does that look from your perspective in growing the ecosystem, and how you reach out to people and how you bring them in?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, some of this is philosophical, right? So it's just sort of like, how does Nick approach growth, and what's the playbook he's going to adopt? And there's a variety of ways to go about this. In fact, before I became team lead, I was head of growth, or growth lead. I forget the title at the moment, but I did a whole report on, and I went back and looked at McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting, and a host of other books that I sort of had read over the years. And I pulled out all the different growth playbooks or vectors that the consulting, the folks that actually get paid to drive growth, what they came up with. And, I was able to kind of give a presentation. So I had, before I became team lead, some ideas around what growth should look like and in the playbooks available to us. I think for me, the way to think about it is, I sort of saw when I was moving into my role sort of twofold. Number one is I wanted to implement some of that, like I said, professionalization, operational stuff. And that's tough, right? Nobody outside of the ecosystem is sort of seeing the graph getting a little more tight on processes, is in the way the foundation works with core devs, the way that core devs work with other core devs, and things like that. So it was tough, and we still got work to do, but making sure that we had very airtight and logic and battle tested operational excellence within the graph ecosystem was priority number one. And then to get more to your question, how then with this new foundation, this more Nick's approach to professionalize the foundation, how then do we begin growing? And I think the graph's an interesting point, like a lot of projects within the ecosystem. It has some legacy investments and thesis that worked, in our case, worked well. We got a ton of thought leadership. Everybody knows the graph. The brand is very well recognized. And it's this question of like, well, what do we want to do next? And my opinion on that is like the graph, as I said earlier, it's a pioneer. Like it stood up DeFi, it introduced standards to the industry, and it's in the DNA of the graph, its founders, all the contributors within the ecosystem to be pioneers. And so we are working on a lot of things that I think will sort of double click on the fact that the graph at its heart is a pioneer. And so I expect new technology to be announced to the world soon that I think a lot of people will find interesting.
Cool.
If I had to sort of say what it is without saying what it is, I would just say, the graph understands that there needs to be a new approach to indexing blockchain data and the way in which we interact with it. And who better to do it than the folks that launched it and learned all the lessons along the way. So the graph is looking at growth through new technology, and we're interested in other market segments. So for a long time, like a lot of industry participants, we all targeted the dev community, but the industry is becoming a little bit more segmented, and it's becoming a little bit more, you have to be a little more thoughtful and deliberate about which segments of the market you're going to target. So as an example, everybody's talking about institutions right now who's coming from Wall Street to participate, and what are these institutional type users going to look for in technology. There's also this bolt-on persona of like enterprise users, which is obviously a flavor too different from institutions. And so the graph is actively working on forming some institutional and enterprise like users and bringing them to the network. Again, without saying too much, I'll say that it's been amazing to see some of the traction we've had there. And the big surprise for me, by the way, is seeing this new market segment emerge was big time players, names that a lot of people would probably recognize and know. I'm talking like from TradFi, institutional type people, already being familiar with the graph and familiar with the tech. And that was an amazing moment for me and members of the ecosystem to be like, oh, this isn't a cold call. These folks know who we are. So we're super excited about growth in different market segments, and we're paying a lot of attention to that institutional enterprise segments, and we're going to offer some new tech pretty soon. So I think a lot of things coming for sure.
Very cool. I guess as we zoom out and wrap up, the graph is a very unique portion of the Web3 tech stack in terms of infrastructure. And I think that shapes the way in which you, working in that ecosystem, are able to get your finger on the pulse for what's happening with blockchain, crypto, Web3, whatever, and also to kind of like envision in a different way where the puck is going. I, from the outside looking in, have very different opinions for how the institutions are coming in and the banks and TradFi and all that. From your perspective, from the very unique niche in which you fill, where are we going as an industry? You've kind of dropped some hints into how you're planning to prepare the graph to be ready to meet this next iteration. But like in 2 to 3 years, from your perspective, where are we going to be with cryptocurrencies and blockchain networks? How prevalent is it going to be in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I mean, I always want to sound super smart and to say the most amazing thing, but I'll just be honest with you and those that are tuning in. I have no idea, and nobody knows. We're all guessing, and the problem of asserting like a definitive answer or saying something super declarative is the dynamic nature of what's going on here. You have all these institutional users showing up and expressing interest in what's going on here. You have an evolving governance or I meant regulatory environment. So that's new. What's going on there and how does that shake out? And then you have just the day-to-day nuts and bolts demand from people all across the world for a solution in the types of things that this industry provides, right? So you've interviewed a lot of guests. I'm sure you've done some out of country guests. I was always shocked when I talked to people that were outside of the US, which is where I'm based, to hear how reliant they were on crypto as a hedge against inflationary risk or to ease the ability to transact, just to do business. So this is a really dynamic problem set. I can't say anything super smart about it. We're watching, we're trying to kind of get out ahead of these things. I think AI is another component of this that's super interesting, right? So how does that impact not only what we're trying to build at the industry level, but sort of the participants? Like, what is a software engineer and a dev in 10 years from now? Like, how does that look? I'm not technical, so we would need to ask one of them how this is impacting them. But from what I'm seeing, it's had a huge impact. So I think we should pay attention to the regulatory environment. I think we should pay attention to stable coins, real world assets, some of these buzzwords that we're hearing. I think we should pay attention to AI and how that's going to shape the industry and the role it's going to play. And I think the pioneers within Web3 ecosystems like the Graph, they'll figure out what they need to do, and they'll do what they've always done, which is develop new tech at the bleeding edge of what's possible.
In a world where everyone has a hot take, having an honest answer where you just say, I don't know, we're just trying to meet demand as it comes up. I think that's a great answer in and of itself. Kind of like zooming out, the last question I want to ask, I know might be hard, but I know that you can kind of pull an answer pretty quickly. You've been in the space full time now for 4 years. I remember I had all these visions of sugar plums and fairies when I first got into the crypto space, and I just thought there were all these amazing things that were going to happen. And then reality ground me down. And here we are 8 years later, and some things have come to fruition. A lot of things haven't. So drawing back on your experience over the past 4 years, the question I want to ask is, what's one thing that has been delivered that you thought was going to be delivered when you came into the space? And what's one thing that you thought was going to be delivered but hasn't yet done so?
Sure. So I think on the delivered side, it was AI. I mean, the Graph has a core dev team, and one of the Graph founders has been thinking a lot about that intersection of AI and blockchain data. And I think the Graph is starting to do a lot of interesting things there. For any listener that's like, well, what is that? Go check out Yaniv Tal and his team at GEO, their work on knowledge graphs and what they're building at Geo. It's a thesis on that intersection between AI and blockchain data. And as I said, we had like a core dev team at the Graph who for a lot of years was sort of thinking about, number one, how will AI facilitate the transactions and the participation in the network? So there was a tooling component of it. And then they were also approaching this question of like, how does AI and blockchain data sort of communicate in the world, and how can we facilitate that interaction? So I would say on the firsthand delivery and something, the Graph was first to the table, one of the first to the table on this AI blockchain convergence, and the story is far from over. Something that wasn't delivered, I mean, I'm not going to have a great answer for this, but I think it's, I'm gonna kind of put two answers on the table here, which is like meme coins, what's going on there, and what's the intent, and then NFTs. Is that story over? I did a lot of interviews with people when I was doing my podcast that had smart things to say about NFTs, and it wasn't about artwork and stuff like that. It was about land rights and deeds and working with institutions. And so I doubt that story's over yet, but yeah, where is that? Like, where is the next wave of what an NFT actually secures for an individual? And then, stable coins, like, what is this? And how's this going to shake out? Meme coins, what is this? Do we need it? Can it shake out? I'm very critical of those things, but that's my answer to that.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to join the Smart Economy podcast today. If somebody listened to this and they want to reach out to you, who do you want to chat with, and how can they contact you?
Yeah, so find me on Twitter. I'm, at 22node on Twitter, and you reach out to me, you can DM, I check my DMs, and yeah, it's been fun to have users and different people reach out to me there. So start there. And then, yeah, if you know anybody in the graph ecosystem that's building any of the core dev teams, and you want to get up to date on some of this tech that I've hinted towards, definitely reach out to them. They can inform you. And of course, you can always go to thegraph.com. You can see all the different products. You can get started building your own dApp using the graph with the security and the benefits of building on decentralized infra. So just go to thegraph.com and plug in there. And lastly, congrats on episode 100. I remember exactly my episode and the amount of work that went into doing that. So I didn't know before today that I was episode 100, but because I've been in your shoes, I just want to say major shout out. Keep up the great work. You did a great job today. A fun interview. So I loved spending time with you, and congrats to you and all the people supporting this podcast. I hope there's 100 more.
Cheers. And if anybody is hungry to get a backlog, a wealth of knowledge and information, go check out the GRT IQ podcast. There's more than 200 episodes for you to dig into and get a sense of the history of what has happened in the graph ecosystem and maybe kind of smell the winds for where it's going next. So thank you so much today, Nick, for your time. This was a fantastic conversation, and congrats on your role at team lead and to the many things that you and your team are going to be building.
Thank you so much, Dylan.
Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Smart Economy podcast. To stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes and insights, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our video content. If you enjoyed this discussion, please consider showing your support by liking, commenting, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcasting platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and bring even better content your way. And we'd also love to hear from you. So please drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share what topics you'd like us to cover or who you'd like to see as our next guest. And if you or someone you know might make for an interesting guest, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always on the hunt for fresh voices and new perspectives. And for our NEO token holders out there, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. So, once again, thank you for taking the time to tune in to the Smart Economy podcast, and we will catch you on the next one.